How's it going, everyone? Wanted to read an essay by Alexander Dugin that just came out a couple of days ago. You can say what you want about Dugin. Definitely don't endorse everything that he says, but he's definitely a fascinating guy. Very well read, very prolific in his writing, and his understanding of the world. Um, so it's cool that we kind of have a modern philosopher living with us, because those are so rare to be living with those types of people who are kind of synthesizing um, the thought of the world in its current time, and making a little bit of a new interpretation on it, or synthesizing it a little bit different way. And here he's kind of doing that same thing. The part one of this was interesting. Some of his stuff is a little abstract. It is translated, so you have to keep that in mind as well. But yeah, I thought this one was brought in some really interesting ideas about how to think about the state, government in relation to humanity and our violence, and the I guess our the way that we perceive the world in the government system, the in the culture that we live in, and how that's changed over time, and what it looks like now. And he's going to be interpreting that in a geopolitical manner, using the war in Ukraine as a subject. So it's really interesting in that regard. Again, I'm not endorsing everything that he says, but just interesting ways to think about those topics I described before. And as we're going through it, I can hopefully can elaborate and provide some insight as well, as we go through. So, a brief history of chaos from ancient Greece to postmodernism, part 2. Alexander Dugin. It would seem the SMO is talking about a conflict between two world orders, a unipolar one represented by the collective West and Ukraine, and a multipolar one defended by Russia and those who are somehow on its side, primarily China, Iran, North Korea, some Islamic states, partly India, Turkey, but also Latin American countries and Africa. This is indeed the case, but let us look at the problem from a perspective that interests us and find out what role chaos plays. Let us immediately emphasize the point that the term world order clearly appeals to explicit structure, i.e., it's the antithesis of chaos. We are therefore dealing with two models of the cosmos, unipolar and multipolar. If so, we are dealing with a collision between worlds, between orders, structures, and chaos has nothing to do with this. The West offers its version, a center and a periphery, where the center is itself and its value system. Russia, and more often passively, the countries that support it, would be an alternative cosmos, many civilizations, many worlds. One hierarchy versus several hierarchies, organized on autonomous principles, most often a historical religious basis. This is exactly how Huntington imagined the future. So this is Dugin's thesis, summed up pretty well. Multipolar world versus unipolar world. The clash of civilizations is a competition of worlds, of orders. There is a Western-centric model and a pluralistic one. In this context, SMO, the Special Military Operation, appears as something quite logical and rational. The unipolar world, almost consolidated after the collapse of the bipolar model since 1991, does not want to give up its leading position. New power centers struggle to free themselves from the power of a decaying hegemon. Even Russia might be in a hurry to challenge him directly, but you never know how weak or strong he really is until you try. So that's interesting way to think about it. All this posturing that, states do, nations do, but you never really know how weak or strong they are until you're battling up against them. In any case, it is quite clear there are two struggling cosmos models, one with a clear center and one with several. In any case, there is no chaos, and we encounter something like that. It is only a phase transition situation. This would partly explain the situation in Ukraine, where chaos is in full swing, but the problem also has other dimensions. Hobbesian chaos, the natural state, and Leviathan. Let us take a closer look at what constitutes a unipolar Western-centric world order. It is not only the politico-military domination of the United States and its vassal states, especially NATO. It is also the implementation of an ideological project. This ideological project corresponds to progressive democracy. The meaning of progressive democracy is that there should be more and more democracy, and that the vertical mode of society should be replaced by a horizontal one, in the extreme case, a networked rhizomatic model. The founder of Western political science, Thomas Hobbes, imagined the history of society as follows. In the first phase, people live in a state of nature. Here, quote, man is wolf to man, unquote. Homo homini lupus est. It is an aggressive initial social chaos, based on selfishness, cruelty, and power. Hence the principle of war of all against all. According to Hobbes, this is the nature of man, because man is inherently evil but also intelligent. Man's intelligence told him that if he continued to remain in his natural state, sooner or later people would kill each other. It was therefore decided to create a terrible man-made idol, Leviathan, who would impose the rules and laws and make sure everyone followed them. In this way, mankind solved the problem of wolf coexistence. Leviathan is a super wolf, certainly stronger and crueler than any man. Leviathan is a state. So that is government. That's state. So it's a very powerful idea. Very true idea. At least, conceived in our minds as modern human beings. Saying otherwise, let's get into metaphysical stuff, but it's true for, what we see in the real world. The tradition of political realism, first and foremost in international relations, stops here. There's only the natural state and the Leviathan. If you don't want one, you get the other. So you get wolf society, where it's every man for himself, or you get the Leviathan, the state, where it's organized, but the violence is much greater in scope. Draws to mind when Peter Thiel says the state contains violence in both senses of the word. So it contains violence, it does violence, but it also contains it from, manifesting in our interpersonal relations. So moving on. Chaos in international relations in the tradition of realism. This model is rather materialist. The natural state corresponds to aggressive chaos, to enmity. Empedocles' alternative to love and friendship. The introduction of Leviathan rebalances enmity by imposing rules and regulations on all quote-unquote wolves that they dare not violate on pain of punishment and, at the limit, death. Hence the formula proposed much later by Max Weber, quote, the state is the subject of legitimate violence, unquote. Leviathan is consciously stronger and more terrible than any predator and is therefore able to stop a series of irreversible aggressions. But Leviathan is not love, it is not eros, it is not psyche. It is only a new impression of enmity, a total enmity raised to a higher degree. Hence the right of any sovereign state, and Leviathan is sovereign, and this is its main characteristic, to start a war with another state. Having pacified internal enmity, Leviathan is free to wage war externally. Is this right to go to war that becomes the basis of chaos in international relations? According to the school of realism, international relations are chaos precisely because there can be no supreme authority between different Leviathans. They are at the macro level, repeating the natural state. The wolves against the wolves. The state is selfish and evil because selfish and evil is the man who founded it. Internal chaos is frozen to reveal itself in the war between states. Political realism has been completely overcome even in democracies and is considered a legitimate point of view in international relations. Has not been completely overcome even in democracies and is considered a legitimate point of view in international relations. Locke's order. This is not all. Hobbes was followed by another important thinker, John Locke, who formulated a different school of political thought, liberalism. Locke held that man himself was not evil, but rather ethnically neutral, a tabula rasa. If Leviathan is evil, its citizens will also be evil. But if Leviathan changes its character and orientation, it is able to transform the nature of people. People in themselves are nothing. They can be made into wolves and sheep. Everything revolves around the ruling elite. If Hobbes thinks of the state before the state and predetermines its monstrous character, hence the Hobbesian chaos, and compares it to the state, Locke examines the already existing state and what might follow if the state itself were to stop being an evil monster and become a source of morality and education, and then disappear altogether, transferring the initiative to re-educated, enlightened citizens. Hobbes thinks in terms of past and present, Locke in present-future categories. In the present, the state is evil, selfish, and cruel, hence the wars and chaos in international relations. In the future, however, it is destined to become good, so its citizens will cease to be wolves and wars will cease because mutual understanding will prevail in international relations. In other words, Hobbes proposes dialectic of chaos and its relative removal in Leviathan with a new invasion of interstate relations, while Locke proposes to resolve the violent nature of the state by remaking, re-educating, and enlightening its citizens and abolishing war between nations. But the enmity inherent in Hobbes, Locke proposes to replace not with love and order, but with trade, exchange, speculation. The merchant, and not the prophet, priest, or poet, replaces the warrior. And at the same time, trade is called douce commerce, quote-unquote gentle commerce. It is gentle compared to the brutal seizure of booty by the warrior after the conquest of the city. But how brutal is it demonstrated by Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice? It is important to note that Locke thinks of the pure post-state commercial order as something that follows the age of states. This means that the collective mind hypostasized in Leviathan is not abolished at all, only lowered to a lower level. A re-educated, enlightened citizen, former wolf, is now himself a Leviathan, but only a new one. By re-educating his subjects, the enlightened monarch, synonymous with the enlightened state, re-educates himself. World government as an enlightenment project. Hence the theory of political democracy. The state educates its citizens, eradicates aggression and selfishness, and becomes itself altruistic and pacifist. Hence the main law of international relations. Democracies do not fight each other. And again, if states are no longer selfish, sovereign, that's the important part, they are able to democratically establish a world government with supranational authority. It will ensure that all societies are good, that they only trade with each other, and that they never wage war against each other. Gradually, states will be abolished and a one world, a global civil society will be born. Economics, Locke's chaos. It seems that in Locke and the subsequent tradition of liberalism that takes up his ideas, chaos has been eliminated. But it's not the case. There is no military chaos, but there is economic chaos. Therefore, there is no aggression, but there is chaos. Yes, an aggression and hostility remain, but they acquire a different character, namely that imposed on society by the commercial capitalist state, specifically the Western European state of the new era. That the market should be free and the economy deregulated is a central thesis of liberalism, i.e. modern democracy. Chaos is thus reintroduced, but only a different guise, with aggression cut off and selfishness directed. Leviathan is identified with reason. It was founded on its basis, and reason is thought of as something universal. Hence Kant, his transcendental reasoning, and calls for universal peace. This reasoning is not abolished, along with the overcoming of Leviathan, but transformed, softened, collectivized. Leviathan is collective, and then atomized into many units, written on blank sheets of atomic individuals. Post-state man differs from pre-state man in that the mind is henceforth his individual domain. This is how Hegel understood civil society. In it, the common rationality of the old monarchy is passed on to the multitude of citizens, the bourgeoisie, the city dwellers. Therefore, in liberal theory, since Leviathan is rationality, the distribution of rationality to all individuals eliminates the need for it. Society will be peaceful as it is, as predicted by the Leviathan above, and will release the wolfish tendencies in the form removed through commercial competition. The liberal racist social Darwinist theory Spencer says the same thing in a harsh form. Gentle commerce, Daus commerce, is gentle chaos. Chaos in the context of liberal democracy. So that for me, that was a very interesting way to think about the transformation of the Leviathan of our chaotic, violent selves. It's just gone completely internal, in atomized to the individual in their own head. And we're going to get into a little further, but that just compared to, the state would kind of take care of things, and it's you have your grievances with it and everything, but now it's not a war between states. It's really concentrated into a war of ideas, and that within everyone's heads, specifically because of the transformation of society into a commercial society. So let's keep going. New democracy and governments, the gentle chaos of dissipation. In the West, there is a balance between Hobbes and Locke, a pessimistic and retrospective conception of the state and of human nature itself, and an optimistic and progressive one. The former is called realism, the latter liberalism. Okay, so I think this is important. So in the West, there is a balance between Hobbes and Locke. So we still hold on to the Leviathan state, we still hold to the structures of the state, somewhat a pessimistic and retrospective conception of the state, and of human nature himself, and an optimistic and progressive one. The former is called realism, the latter liberalism. So, Dugin's being cynical there, I think, of the way we look at the modern way we look at nation states and governments. Both modern Western-centric and modernist theories coincide in general, but differ in particularities. Firstly, in their interpretation of chaos. For the realist, chaos is inherently evil and aggressive, and it is to combat it that the state, the the Leviathan was created. But chaos has not disappeared from internal. Has not disappeared, and from internal has become external. Hence the interpretation of nature of war in realism. Liberalism shares the interpretation of the genesis of the state, but believes that the evil in man can be overcome with the help of the state, which transforms, enlightens, and then also enlightens its citizens to the point of penetrating their code, their nature. In this sense, the state, especially the enlightened state, acts as a programmer to install a new operating system in society. With the success of liberalism, the theory of a new democracy or globalism began to take shape. Its essence is that nation states are abolished and wars disappear with them, while man's aggressive and selfish nature is changed through social engineering, which transforms man, turns the wolf into a sheep. Leviathan no longer exists, and the old aggressive, wolfish chaos is abolished. Thus begins the chaos of world trade. The mixture of cultures and peoples, uncontrolled migration, multiculturalism, the merging of everyone and everything into one world. Excuse me. Well, this creates a new chaos, not aggressive, but soft, quote unquote, gentle. In this case, control is not abolished, but relegated to a lower level. Whereas government, I don't know why there's a separate parentheses there, but whereas government, even in the old democracy, was elective, but hierarchical and vertical structure. Now it's governance or governing, where power enters the governed, merging with it until it becomes indistinguishable. So power enters the governed, merging it. So here we go. So it goes from government, elective government. Now it's governance or governing, where power enters the governed, merging it with it until it becomes indistinguishable. Power and the governed. Not censorship, but self-censorship. Not control from above, but self-control. So again, this is the it seems like he's saying this is the self-censoring, the Leviathan in our minds that we're trying to control. But it's coming from the enlightened elites, quote unquote enlightened elites, that have their way of perfecting humanity. And not allowing the balance of order and chaos to live that necessary balance, in my view. Thus, the vertical Leviathan molds itself into the horizon of the scattered atomic individuals and enters into each of them. It's a hybrid of chaos, natural state, and Leviathan, universal rationality. Indeed, this is how Kant thought of civil society. The universal is poured into the atoms and is no longer an external instance, but the individual reasoning of the enlightened citizen who curbs his aggression and moderates his egoism. This is how violence is placed within the individual. Chaos does not divide the power in the masses, not the states among themselves, but man himself. It is Ulrich Beck's risk society. The danger now comes from the ego and its schizophrenic splits, which become the norm. This leads to the schizo individual, the bearer of the particular chaos of the new progressive liberal democracy. Instead of harming others, the quote-unquote chaotic liberal damages himself, beats himself up, splits and divides. Gender reassignment surgery and the promotion of sexual minorities in general could not have come at a better time. The gender option, the freedom of choice, pits two autonomous identities against each other in the same individual. Gender politics allows chaoticism to take full effect. It is, however, a special chaos, devoid of formalism in the form of aggression and war. Chaos as the human norm of the new democracy. It is precisely this order of the new democracy that the West seeks to impose on humanity. Globalism insists on commercial, free market chaos combined with the LGBT plus ideology, which normalizes the split within the individual, postulates quote-unquote chaoticism as an anthropological model. This assumes that rationality and the prohibition of aggression are already included in quote-unquote chaoticism through the mass demonization of nationalism and communism, through the mass demonization of nationalism and communism, especially the Soviet Stalinist version. It turns out that the unipolar world and the corresponding global order is an order of progressive chaos. It is not pure chaos, but neither is it an order in the full sense of the term. It is a quote-unquote governance that tends to develop horizontally. So the thesis of a world government turns out to be too hierarchical, leviathanic. It is more correct to speak of world government as invisible, implicit world government. Gilles Deleuze rightly pointed out that in the age of classical capitalism, the image of the mole is optimal. Capital works invisibly to undermine traditional pre-modern structures and build its hierarchy. The image of the snake is better suited to the new democracy. Its flexibility and movements indicate the hidden power that has entered the atomized mass of the world's liberals. Each of them individually is a bearer of spontaneity and chaotic unpredictability, bifurcation. At the same time, however, a rigid program is built into them that predetermines the entire structure of desire, behavior, and goal setting, like a factory with functioning desire machines. The freer the atom is in relation to the constellation, the more predictable its trajectory becomes. This is what Putin meant by quoting Dostoevsky the demons in his passage on Shigalev, quote, "I begin with absolute freedom and end with absolute slavery," unquote. The Leviathan as a global idol, an all-powerful man-made demon, is no longer necessary, as liberal individuals become little Leviathans, chaotic specimens, free of religion, class, nation, gender, and the hegemony of such a progressive democratic West does not represent order in the old sense or even democratic order, but precisely the hegemony of quote-unquote peaceful chaos. Pacifists go to the front. To what extent is this Lockean chaos peaceful? To the extent that it is not faced with an alternative, namely order. These can be Western orders, even the old Hobbesian democracy, which could collectively be called Trumpism or old liberalism, and other types of orders, generally non-democratic, which the West collectively calls authoritarianism, i.e. the regimes of Russia, China, many Arab countries, and so on. Everywhere we see other articulations of order that openly and explicitly oppose chaos. Here is an interesting point. Faced with opposition, the Western liberal neo-democratic pacifist goes mad and becomes extremely militant. Yes, democracies do not fight each other, but non-democratic regimes, on the contrary, war must be ruthless. Only a chaotic, without gender or other collective identity, is a human being, at least a human being in the progressive sense. All others are the backward and unenlightened masses on which the vertical order, the cynical Leviathan, or even more autonomous and autarkic versions of the order is based, and they must be destroyed. Post-order. So this, I guess, just, he's emphasizing, without the order that's imposed by our old traditional structures, even if they are corrupt and show to be exposing our violence, they without them, we are releasing the wolves again, in a mask of individualism, of freedom, of self-autonomy that's says it's not violent and resentful, but it is, and it's actually way more violent than the traditional Leviathan that Hobbes points out, the traditional Leviathan democracy. Post-order. Thus, the unipolar world enters into decisive battle with the multipolar world, precisely because unipolarism is the culmination of a will to end order altogether, replacing it with post-order, a new world chaos. The internationalization of aggression and the schizo-civilization of chaos are only possible when there are no borders in the world, no nations, no states, no Leviathan, i.e. no order as such, and until there is, pacifism will remain absolutely militant. So there you go. The transgenders and perverts are given uniforms and sent into eschatological battle with the opponents of chaos. So, I mean, he's being hyperbolic, but with the transgenders and perverts, but the people that, support those types of movements and the reshaping of the human mind through their own liberal utopia are engaging in this this new chaos, this new world chaos. And I found it very interesting. People say like we're tending to one world government, but Dugin here is suggesting it's not a one world government in the old sense of the term, but something entirely new. And I can't exactly say what that is, but not government, but governance. And yeah, that's definitely something to think about, I think, both internally and, also imposed maybe by the some techno elite or something like that is telling you more freedom, something like that. Again, I can't really put it into a full shape or something, but just something to think about. Guardian pigs of chaos. Gardarin pigs of chaos. All this casts a new conceptual light on the special military operation. Russia's civilization war with the West against unipolarism and in favor of multipolarism. The aggression here is multidimensional and several levels. On the one hand, Russia is demonstrating its sovereignty, which means it is accepting the rule of chaos in international relations. Whichever way you look at it, this is a real war, even if not recognized by Moscow. Moscow hesitates for this for a reason. This is not a classic military conflict between two nation states, but something different. It is a battle of multipolar order against unipolar chaos, and the territory of Ukraine is precisely the conceptual frontier. Ukraine is not order, it is not chaos, it is not a state, it is not a territory, it is not a nation, it is not a people. It is conceptual fog. A philosophical soup in which the fundamental processes of phase transition take place. Anything can arise from this fog, but so far it is an overlay of different chaos, which makes this conflict unique. And I'm not agreeing with all this, but there's definitely, at least as a metaphor, those things that he's saying could very well be true. I mean, there's history is very long, and so we can't say just because there's borders around a country that, there's definitely for sure a state, in terms of, something that has a culture and a people, that is, not divided, in terms of a tradition. And I think that's what he's basically saying, is that it's just been used as a battleground for so long that it's become a fog. If one considers Russia and Putin as realists, the SMO is a continuation of the battle for the consolidation of sovereignty. But it implies a realist thesis of the chaos of international relations and thus the legitimization of war. For a truly sovereign state, no one can forbid doing or not doing something, because that would contradict the very notion of sovereignty. But Russia is clearly fighting not only for the national order against the chaos managed by the globalists, but also for multipolarism, i.e. the right of different civilizations to build their own orders, i.e. to overcome chaos with their own methods. Thus, Russia is at war with a new world chaos only for the principle of order, not for its own, the Russia one, but for order as such. In other words, Russia seeks to defend precisely the world order that opposes Western hegemony, i.e. the hegemony of internalized chaos, i.e. globalism. And there is another important point. Ukraine itself is a purely chaotic entity, and not only now in its history, Ukraine has been a territory of anarchy, an area where the natural state prevailed. A Ukrainian is a wolf to a Ukrainian, and all the more a wolf to a Muscovite or a Yabloko. Ukraine is a natural area of anarchic free will, a total nomad camp, where chubby, atomized autonomists seek profit or adventure, unbound by any structure. Ukraine is also a chaos, hideous, inhuman, and senseless. It is ungovernable and unwieldy. Chaos of wild pigs and their girlfriends. These are the pigs of Gardar, in which the demons cast out by Christ entered and plunged into the abyss. The fate of Ukraine as an idea and a project comes down to this very symbol. SMO, a war of polysemantic chaos. It is therefore not surprising that different kinds of chaos have clashed in Ukraine. On the one hand, the Western-managed global chaos of the new democracy has supported and oriented the chaotic Ukrainians in their confrontation with the Russian order. Yes, that order is still only a promise, only a hope, but Russia from time to time acts just like its carrier. We are talking about empire, multipolarity, and head-on confrontation with the West. Most of the time, however, this vector is presented in the form of sovereignty realism, which made the SMO possible. We must not lose sight of the deep penetration of the West within Russian society. The chaos in Russia itself has its own serious underpinning, which undermines the vector of Russia's identity and the assertion of its order. The fifth and sixth columns in Russia are supported of Western chaos. Both are sharpening and corroding the will of the state and the people to win an SMO. Therefore, Russia and SMO, being primarily on the side of order, sometimes acts according to the rules of chaos, imposed both by the West, New World chaos, and by the very nature of the enemy. The Russian chaos. The Russian chaos, it must win, creating a Russian order. And the last thing, Russian society carries with it a chaotic beginning, but it is another chaos, the Russian chaos, and this chaos has its own characteristics, its own structures. It is the opposite of the New World chaos of the liberals because it is not individualistic and material. It is also different from the heavy, fleshy, corporeal, sadistic chaos of the Ukrainians, which naturally breeds violence, terrorism, trampling all the norms of humanity. Russian chaos is special. It has its own seed. This code does not coincide with the state. It is structured completely independent of it. Russian chaos is closer to the Greek original, which is a void between heaven and earth, not yet filled. It is not so much a mixture of warring seeds of things as in Ovid, but in anticipation of something great, the birth of love and appearance of the soul. The Russians are a precocious people for something that has not yet fully manifested itself, and is precisely this special kind of chaos, pregnant with new thoughts and new actions, that the Russian people carry with them. For this Russian chaos, the picture of modern Russia's statehood is narrow and even ridiculous. The picture of modern Russian statehood is narrow and even ridiculous. It carries with the seeds of some inconceivable great reality, a Russian dance star. And the fact that the SMO includes not only the state, but also the Russian people themselves makes everything even more complex and complicated. The West is a chaos. Ukraine is a chaos. The Russian people are chaos. The West has an order in the past. We have an order in the future. And these elements of order, fragments of the order of the past, elements of the future, contours of alternatives, conflicting edges of projects are mixed with the battle of chaos. No wonder SMO looks so chaotic. This is a war of chaos, with chaos, for chaos, and against chaos. Russian chaos is he who must win, creating a Russian order. So that was Alexander Dugin recently writing on his website, A Brief History of Chaos from Ancient Greece to Postmodernism, Part 2. Yeah, there's so much in there. I really like the transformation aspect from Leviathan, how he described how what's his name? Locke transformed Leviathan into what does he say here? Hobbes proposes a dialectic of chaos and its relevant removal in Leviathan. So taking the wolves, helping the war of all against all by creating Leviathan, while Locke proposes to resolve the violent nature of the state by re-educating, enlightening its citizens, and abolishing the war between nations. But the struggle inherent in Hobbes, Locke proposes to replace not with love and order, or the enmity inherent in Hobbes. Locke proposes to replace not with love and order, but with trade, exchange, and speculation. Not with love and order, but with trade, exchange, and speculation. So the merchant and not the prophet, priest, or poet replaces the warrior. So that's just, how we lowered the standards from, the warrior class. You can say what you want about that. I mean, it's very, looking back, you can say, oh, that was so low, and maybe it is. But the standards were even lowered further by replacing the standards with trade, exchange, and speculation, instead of the prophet, priest, or poet. And I was listening to Jonathan Pajot say how in traditional societies, the warrior societies, that they had these people, the prophets, the priests, and the poets, who kind of informed the warrior class, the kings, and everyone else of what is good, and it kind of fell from there, and everything, was decided from there what to do, and that provided some order for sure, which is really good and allowed for society to function and remain relatively stable. But now we don't have any. The chaos there's no bonds between people anymore. Even the state can't provide the any order anymore. The chaos has, because of lowering the standards to trade, exchange, and speculation, to political economy. Maybe that's the not the best way to say it, but just a commercialized society, putting money and wealth at the highest levels. And yeah, and then when Dugin says that liberals are still focused on this old way, he's saying the Lockean way, and Russia is focused on the future, maybe putting the prophet, priest, and poet in higher regard. I mean, it's just an interesting way to think about that. Like, maybe that's a way forward for the West? Is that a way? Do you guys think that is that a way forward for the West? Can we do that? But yeah, I mean, I also thought it was. I mean, again, there's so many interesting things here. The Leviathan. Traditional Leviathans couldn't control the whole world, so the chaos was between the Leviathans, and Lockean liberalism is trying to get rid of all of that through globalized commerce. And now that there is ideological war between two groups of people, the old ways of Leviathans are popping up again, and between nation states. And yeah, I mean, there's so many, like he was saying, there's so many different chaoses that are coming into the picture. But yeah, then it's the question of whether how is all that all resolved? How do that's a huge battle, I think. The conquering of ideology or culture of a generational philosophy to multi-generational philosophy, multi-generational philosophies kind of clashing together, of human existence clashing together, and multipolar, unipolar, new world chaos versus the old kind of Leviathan order, in whatever form that's going to take. One really wants to eliminate the other. The other really wants to exist. And yeah, where we go from here, gotta pray that it's resolved in a peaceful manner and cooler heads prevail. We don't have to live in this kind of dominating world where, multipolar world, let Russia exist in their Leviathan. We don't like it, doesn't mean we don't have to like it, but we can't go around and stomping people, killing people just because of that. And yeah, I think it's about time the United States to the West starts thinking more critically about how to gain control of their the internalized chaos within them. The unleashing the unleashed individual. You know, if that's the case, then there's no state, there's no tradition, and what are we going to do at that point? You know, that's a very difficult and very important, very consequential question. And if we don't address that, then we're in big trouble. So let me know what you guys think, and I will put the article in the description. And yeah, talk to you guys next time.